All right. Welcome back to the slideshow.
How's it going, guys?
I'm Dakota Jackson. I'm a trombonist here in New Orleans. I just got my master's degree in jazz studies, and I have an undergrad in trombone performance. And just love playing the trombone every day.
I'm Benjamin Willtz. I'm a grad school dropout, a band director, and a fly fishing guide. So what a combination there. And I am a bass trombone player. I just love everything about the trombone. I'm just so excited every time I get a chance to sit here and talk about it.
All right. So what do we got going on this week in current events, Ben?
All right. So as a lot of people know at the moment, there are plenty of protests across the country involving the murder of George Floyd, but also just systemic racism in the United States in general. The trombonist Jeff Bradshaw, over in Philadelphia, he's played with Michael Jackson, Earth, Wind and Fire, Roots, and some other groups. He put on a protest of musicians over at the Philadelphia Art Museum. There were hundreds of horn players, apparently, who were wearing masks when not playing, out there, not just playing their horns, but also just doing a normal protest with signs and everything you'd expect, but representing musicians during this. I think this is a great idea. Most musicians were definitely wanting a chance to play, and this was a way for musicians to get out there and play while also voicing their very real concerns. There's actually another one of these protests being held this weekend. Now, at the time of this podcast, it would have already happened, but it's actually going to be on the 27th. So that will be the next one like it. So if you're in Philadelphia, which maybe one of you guys are, check it out. The Philadelphia Museum of Art. So.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and I know that there's been some other kind of musical stuff happening at some of these protests. So if you're interested in doing that, you should definitely go check out and see what you can find. I've this week, man, just talking about my own life, what's been going on. I've been kind of getting back on schedule a little bit, get a little more organized with my practice session and stuff. Got back and I kind of developed my own little warm-up routines that challenge me, and I got one of those going. Has been going really coffee crazy, as Ben knows. I'm deep into the coffee science. I've actually been a barista for a little bit, so I'm real heavy into that. And I mean, yeah, just still living out the pandemic, looking for some different work here and there right now and kind of make it through. And looking at starting a studio, teaching online, applying in a couple lesson places. So we'll see how that pans out. So, but how's your week been going, Ben?
Man, it's been going pretty well. So I did mention before that one of my other jobs, not a band directing job, is a fly fishing guide. I took a couple of kids out fly fishing over here on the Spring River this past Tuesday, and we did really well. And so that was a nice change of pace. The pandemic has affected everything, so we really haven't had a huge volume of clients that we normally would. And so this summer, it's nice to get out. More bad news, I've paid for a raft for the job so I can be working out of my own boat back in April. And it is now June 26th, and I still don't have it. So not fun, but for the most part, things have been going well. I've been spending a lot of time in the office. I've played quite a bit of trombone as well, a little bit of tuba, a lot of upright bass, and even a little bit of ukulele. So it's just nice getting to play some music.
Yeah, and the tenor guitar, man. Don't forget. Ben played me some tenor guitar the other day. So I've been really surprised at the amount of people listening. I mean, to be completely honest with you guys, I was hoping for like 10 people at most, and I've been getting a lot more than that. And I also really love the engagement I've been getting from everybody. So please keep posting and everything. And on that note, I got a couple corrections from some people, which are more than welcome, because I mean, a big part of this is to continue our own research and fact check ourselves. And also it kind of brought around our topic for this week as well. But before we do that, what's the corrections? The first thing, I'm kind of in contact with this guy to see if it's okay if I post all this. But a guy on Trombone Chat by the name of La Trombonista, that's his username on Trombone Chat. He was super knowledgeable about early trombone and left a really long thing going way more in depth on a couple things. And if it's cool with him, I'll post that at the bottom of this in the description section so you can check that out. Like, for example, like I said, Trompetta Minister, I think, in the first episode, thinking that was war trumpet. And he said that it was actually like quite the opposite. It was like trumpet for entertainment or something. What do you as far as corrections, Ben?
Big giant correction. I mistakenly said that there was a trombone in Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, which there wasn't. Its first appearance in Beethoven's symphonies was the fifth. So I definitely apologize for everybody who had to sit through and listen to me spout that off. But like I said, I'm a grad school dropout, so you get what you pay for, and the podcast is free.
Yeah, I woke up with a message from one of my trombone teachers on that one.
Cody, real quick, so you have mentioned Trombone Chat. If anybody's listening to this who possibly hasn't heard of the Trombone Chat forum, I highly suggest checking that out. A URL for you guys to check out is simply trombonechat.com. It's a wonderful site that has everything from instruments for sales, job postings, and discussions on very similar to what we're talking about here on the podcast. It's got discussions like that all throughout this forum. I believe every trombone player, especially somebody who might be listening to this podcast, I think they get plenty out of that. So I just wanted to quickly mention that since we brought it up casually, a lot of trombone players might know it, but if there's even one person who doesn't, it'd be worth it.
Yeah, for sure, man. That's definitely where I go when I'm looking to reference the sea of experts, you know? All right, so our topic this week is how to shop for a trombone, which was a fan recommendation. The user was Sneaky Ninja 4782 on Reddit. So thanks for the recommendation. If anyone else has any recommendations out there on episodes, we'd love to hear them and try and get to them. But just how to shop for a horn. So I think what me and Ben are going to do is we're going to go super far out. Like if you've never owned a trombone, never bought a trombone, or completely new to the world trombone, like beginner stuff, and then try and go into the details of the most customizable high-end options out there. But when it comes to beginner stuff, I'm kind of let Ben take over since he's a teacher and he works with a lot more beginners than I do. But real quick before we do that, I thought we'd just talk about our trombone buying experiences. And what you got, Ben?
Well, I had an odd beginning to my trombone buying experience. I was a tuba player all throughout high school, and actually didn't start playing trombone until I got to college. That's a whole different story, but mostly it was because I preferred to listen to the trombone than listen to the tuba, as many of you guys could imagine. Anyways, so before I got to college, I owned one trombone, and it was a yard sale find. And I think we paid something like $50 for it. And I just wanted to say I owned a trombone because I was going to college to be a music major, so I just need to have all the instruments I could. So the trombone was added there, and it was a Con 18H Director. You guys will find out that they are very ubiquitous instruments. If you find a used trombone, there is a high chance that it is going to be a Con 18H Director. But anyways, so that was my first trombone I ever owned. I never played it. I rarely played it, usually goofing off. It wasn't until I got to college over at the University of Arkansas Monticello, I was playing in the jazz band. I started playing bass trombone. I picked up the bass trombone, and my first semester there, or my second semester playing bass trombone in the jazz band, I was like, man, I really like this trombone, or really like playing bass trombone. And I the college told me, I learned from the college that I could get more of my scholarship money that was owed to me because I was capped out of my scholarship if I chose to buy a computer or an instrument. Well, I was going to pick an instrument. And by that point, I was on the fence about tuba and trombone. And I decided in that very moment that I was going to pick a trombone because, well, hey, this college will give me the money for it, and I need to find me a good trombone. So I had to do a lot of research in a short amount of time in order to get all my money released from the college. Well, talking to trusted trombone teachers and friends and doing research online, I didn't have the ability to try out the instrument before I bought it because of the very short notice, which I would not suggest doing. And I landed on a Yamaha 830 Xeno bass trombone, mostly because everywhere I had read, it talked about these instruments being extremely consistent. And so I wanted to make sure that rather than buy an instrument that could be a hit or miss, that I got something that was consistent and would play like a bass trombone. I've used this horn my entire bass trombone career. Yeah, so this trombone's done really well by me. Maybe looking back, I probably wouldn't have made that same decision, at least when it comes to buying a trombone before trying it out. However, at the time, I was rushed, and it was a use it or lose it situation when it came to the money. So I felt the need to take the chance on the trombone versus just letting it go. And I definitely do not regret the decision. I just would caution somebody versus making a decision in that short of amount of time. I think I discovered about this rule about 2 days before the deadline. So it was a very, very short amount of time to make a big decision. But like I said, I'm satisfied with the instrument, and I've still been using it, and really don't have too many plans in the future to change instruments anytime soon. So it does well for me. Cody, what about your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, going all the way back to the very beginning, I did start on trombone in sixth grade. But, it's funny when I think back about that time, it's like I knew nothing, and my dad knew nothing. I mean, he played a little guitar. So I wasn't surrounded by trombone players, and right away, I think we looked at some stuff, and then there was like a sales rep that came from, I think, Palin Music, and presented, like, I think the options were like a Yamaha beginner horn, a Jupiter, and I'm not quite sure what the other one was, maybe some kind of King 606 or something, but I ended up going with the Yamaha. I think that's kind of what the guy steered us towards. And it was what it was a beginner trombone. I didn't grow up super wealthy, so it took me a long time to kind of push up from there. But after that, in high school, I eventually got a like an intermediate horn, like a Yamaha, a Yamaha trigger horn. That was a big deal, getting a trigger. I remember that was like my band director was a trumpet player, and that was a big thing. If you're in the high school level, you have to have a trigger. And I have a lot of thoughts on this that I'll tell you a little later in the pod, but just to start, like, that was like the worst horn I've ever owned. Possibly worse than that beginner horn, just if you consider what it was supposed to do, and and I know Ben has a great Yamaha and he loves them, but given all my options in the world and everything, that just soured my relationship, and I've not bought a Yamaha since. I'm not saying they're not great. I'm pretty sure Wycliffe Gordon's playing on a Xeno right now, so they make great instruments, but I just have never gone back to one after that. And then I played that horn up into high school, all the way through high school, and then into college, and I started to realize I needed to shift. And I'll also say that a lot of intermediate horns, they tell you it'll work all the way through high school and then into college, and that was just absolutely not the case. Right away, my trombone teacher said, you got to get rid of this thing. At that time, I was only able to buy one horn, and I was doing a lot of jazz stuff, and I was doing classical at the same time, but I knew I wanted to push in the jazz direction, so I knew that's where I wanted to put my money. And the school that I went to, the UAM, the same school Ben was at, was endorsed by Jupiter. So I was playing on the Jupiter's professional line. And it was a good horn, not really for me in a couple aspects, but I looked around at a couple different things, and I think maybe because of their marketing or whatever, I had always been kind of pushed towards it. Like I thought T302 Edwards were like, in high school for some reason I had just like fantasized this horn like some kind of, Pegasus or something. But Getson's, my band director had an Edwards, and he knew that Getson and Edwards were kind of all in the same place, and I'll go into that in a minute. But the 3508, which is the custom or the pro line on the Getsons, I was able to try one of those out from a band store in Texarkana that the guy sent up, and I knew right away that it was a great horn. And I've played that Getson, I mean, up until today. I think, no joke, up until like a month ago, it didn't even have competition. I have got a couple different horns in that time period. I got a King 2B, which is my band director's. I kind of have a history of doing this where I pick up horns that have some kind of sentimental value, that are great horns that even if I don't play them, I'll enjoy having them around. So I got a King 2B, which is nice. I think it's from like the 70s, possibly late 60s. I'd have to like go back on the serial numbers and check. I was able to rescue a 3B, which I'm still actively working on. It's a 3BF with the trigger. It has a hole in the in the main tuning slide, so it's not like in a usable state at the moment, but I did just recently order a new crook for that. And then I have just recently, I got from my band director, one of my old high school band directors actually, who wasn't even a trombone player. He just got it as a gift from his brother back in the 50s. I have a Getson Sterling Artist model Super Deluxe, which is like insanely rare and all the mystical stuff you want to believe about it, man. I think it has this Tommy Dorsey vibe to it. I really dig it. It has a lot of character. But it is definitely a different horn from the 3508, and I've recently just been going back and forth on those. Right before I transferred colleges in my undergrad, I upgraded on the classical horn side of things, and I have a BAC that was completely custom done by Mike Corrigan. I went and picked it up. I actually went and picked it up with Ben. We both went up to the factory, and that was a great experience. Might talk about that a little bit too, but I picked out the bore size and the slide and just a ton of stuff, the metal, and but it's completely custom. There's not another one like it out there. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been at. All the way from, I have no idea, like my dad on the internet, like looking at websites and then being like, Box are the greatest horns ever made, and me being like, sure, I don't know, all the way to me being all concerned about, bore size and hand crooks and the smallest of details, and wondering about which kind of metals do what. So I feel like I have a good encompassing view. But when it comes to beginner stuff, like I said, I'm going to let Ben kind of take over because he has worked with beginners before, and I just feel like he has a lot of knowledge in the area. So what you got, Ben?
So if you're listening to this podcast, we can safely assume you are more than likely not a beginner trombone player. However, a lot of you guys probably remember your experiences as a beginner. Different bands do different things. We actually do we do a couple different tryouts for my trombone players. A lot of times I am using I will usually try out students with a 6.5 AO mouthpiece, and then see if they can carry a tune normally. Just check to see their ability to match pitch, things like that. So these kids are coming in here mostly blind besides that, and we're telling these people to make a several $100 purchase. Beginner trombones run anywhere from $1,000 down to the not so high quality ones. But for the sake of, I'll actually say, yeah, from $1,000 to about $100. That's what you're going to see in the beginner trombone world. For the most part, if you're paying up to $200 or anywhere from $300 up for a trombone, if you have a reputable source, you're probably going to get a beginner horn that is usable. So for us, what we do is we work through a music store. And one of the reasons why a lot of my students buy new instruments as opposed to getting maybe a used pro horn, even though a lot of times the prices are very similar in that $700 to $800 range, it has to do with the financing available to them. I don't necessarily blame the parents for choosing this option. It's a nice option. But in the world of beginner trombones, once you get to a certain point, they're very similar. We know that Bach's, King's, and Kahn's are all owned by the same conglomerate company now. And so those instruments are going to be very similar. Jupiter used to have a lot of quality control issues, but Jupiters are now great horns. I have some students who play on Anthems. Anthem is definitely a lower price option than most horns. But in the world of trombones, trombone's a very simple instrument, believe it or not. And so you actually have some quality. Beginner instruments are usually made to get beat up. I think the Con Director, Cody's got some opinions on the Con Director, but I think the Con Director has got to be one of the greatest beginner trombones made, and that's why there's so many of them left. I think it served its purpose in being able to be beat up by sixth grader after sixth grader, and that's why they are everywhere. If you go to a pawn shop, you'll find a Con Director. You will find them everywhere, and so I'm a big fan of the Cons, which I will say I do own quite a few Con trombones, so I'm definitely biased. However, Yamaha makes a great beginner horn, but to be honest, if you're looking into purchasing a beginner trombone, only thing I really have to say is make sure you're not just buying a trombone for $100 on Amazon. A lot of times it'll say it comes with a mouthpiece and a really cool case. The shipping might be 2 to 3 weeks, or actually 2 to 3 months even, because it's coming from China. A lot of these shops use pot metal. These instruments will fall apart easy whenever added to the stress of a sixth grader dropping the slide over and over again. These things will break. I think parents would have a conniption if they saw the way their children treat these horns in every sixth grade band class, but that's just a fact of life. And so durability is a huge factor. But for the most part, there's really not a lot to buying a beginner horn. I will say one low-cost option there, if there is nothing left to do and no band director would approve of it, but you just wanted a trombone, the P-bones, right now I found out are $100. Jiggs Wiggum is a huge fan of their product. He sponsors they sponsor him. His name's on it. He loves it. He can play on it. It's a plastic trombone. Just take your regular brass mouthpiece and throw that sucker on there, and they're pretty neat. Kind of like a toy. They have them in tenor and alto models, so that's pretty neat. They're $100. But for the most part, though, the biggest thing when you're looking at a beginner trombone, I guess the overarching thing in here is make sure you're talking to your band director. Even if your band director doesn't know a lot about trombone, they will know to tell you, or if your student, if you're a parent, they will say, hey, don't get that Amazon horn. Don't get that Chinese horn. They will tell you this. Every band director has to deal with this. I've seen a blue flute, a blue clarinet. I've seen it all. Just for the most part, just buy something that you think will last. And I'm going to say the Con 18H again because they're everywhere.
Yeah, man. The just so everyone knows, 18H and directors are the same thing, because that's confusing anybody.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. But yeah. Speaking of P-bones, I got one my senior year of high school as like a toy, not like an actual for use. But I told my mom I wanted one, and it was a gift. And I got one that was green so I could play it in the pep band at the school I was going to, which I never did, by the way, because it's a plastic trombone. and this was actually Ben's idea, but we went to ITF in my undergrad, and I got my P-Bone signed by Jigs Wiggum. So my Jigs P-Bone is signed by Jigs Wiggum. It's got a little heart on it that he put on there.
Yeah.
And
Jigs Wiggum dots his eyes with a heart.
yeah, and I will say that that one of the most humbling experiences I've ever had was I went to a master class he was doing, and he was talking about the P-Bones, and he didn't use it for the whole master class, but he was just saying he endorsed the product, and he said, they're actually viable trombones, and then he played a Frank Rosolino solo just ripping on a pink P-Bone, and I just thought, man, I it's not the equipment, it's me. So yeah, just that's my fun little P-Bone tidbit. But just kind of going off the beginner thing, I just wanted to talk for a quick second, and Ben let me do this because he knows I am very strongly opinionated in this area, and just talking about intermediate horns. And I know that we try to stay pretty neutral on this pod or whatever, and let your ideas flow or whatever, but I'm going to go ahead and throw it out there. I I do feel strongly on this, that intermediate horns in general are just trash. And I know that may sound harsh, but the reality is that intermediate horns are actually kind of expensive. The work they do to put in a rotor or whatever, it costs them money. And then by the time you get a new horn with a rotor on it, and you're looking at all this, it's going to cost you a lot more than the used Pro line market. And I just so suggest, if you're already playing trombone, so you know what it feels like, you can go try stuff out. Go find yourself an old Bach 42 and see if it plays well, or an old Con 88, or there's just an insane amount of, get a King 3 BF like I have over here. If their band director is so concerned with the trigger, even if you want to pay a little more, there's probably, at this point, there's probably old Edwards out there that, that'd be a little more expensive, but like, we're talking about horns that not only will they work for you through high school and college, which an intermediate horn definitely won't work for you in college, most definitely if you're a music major, but not only will they work for you in high school and college, but there's a good chance that you like the Connie 88 so much you just keep playing on that. Christian Lindbergh plays on a Connie 88. The only difference between his Connie 88 and the standard line is the valve, and you can probably find the one with the Lindbergh valve on it if you want. I think it even has a Lindbergh mouthpiece on it. Don't quote me on that, but Jay Friedman plays on a Bach 42, and there's professionals all across the country playing on these incredible stock Pro horns. I know that maybe you want something new and shiny, but the actual craftsmanship and the value of an old used horn just far outweighs that of getting yourself some intermediate horn. The only intermediate horn that I'll even possibly suggest, and I'll just point out that I am extremely biased towards the Getson Company, just because I have two other horns that play fantastic. Their customer relations are fantastic. And I just happened to find out recently that they build even these horns by hand is like a Getson Eterna. And the only reason I recommend that one is because I found out they built it by hand. But even then, you could probably find an older Getson with that's a Pro model for cheaper. So just, at least, my recommendation is that you at least see what's out there. You got any thoughts on that, Ben?
Absolutely, man. So band directors are going to hate me for this one, but I would say that you are much, much better served spending your $1,200 to $1,500 on a King 2B or a 3B that you really like versus just a trombone that has to have the trigger on it. That is a Yamaha Allegro, for example, that is brand spanking new. And I guess the way I've heard it put is a good horn won't always be a good horn, but it can always come back to one. You can always fix it up and make it be a good horn again. But if a horn is not a good horn, it will never be, when it's new, it will never be a good horn. So I'm very against the intermediate horns as well. I try to recommend to my students, unless you're just, usually it's parents are the issue here. They don't like buying used instruments, but I really try my best to steer them towards older pro horns or used pro horns. Sometimes they're not even that old, compared to intermediate or step up horns is what we call them in the music business.
Yeah, I agree, man, that you know, and it's something to think about, that there was a time when there was no beginner horns. And that's a somewhat newer market. And then definitely there was a time when there was no intermediate horns. That's something that happened even later. So, you know, I mean, and this is crazy to think about in my mind, but there was a time when high school kids were playing on tubies all across the country. So, so on that rant, what's up?
An old teacher of mine, he started off, his first trombone was a 6H. They put him on beginner band. So
yeah, the horn that Frank Rosalino used for for reference. All right, guys, on that rant, we're going to go into a little break here, but we'll be right back. All right, welcome back to the slideshow. All right, in the second half, we're going to go a little deeper on the more professional side of things. Probably what you came here for, but I don't know. So we're going to talk about stock horns, modular horns, and completely custom horns. What you got on stock horns, Ben?
Okay, so whenever we refer to a stock horn, we're talking about an instrument that is readily available. Most of these instruments are very similar. They will have certain options, such as different brass content, bells, things like that. But for the most part, they are very similar. Earlier, I talked about like my Yamaha 830 bass trombone. That trombone is a stock professional model horn. It just means that if I order that trombone, I will get that trombone, and that's what it will be. Some good examples of pro model stock horns are going to be things like the Con 88. There's plenty of models of the 88H, but for the most part, an 88 is an 88. There's the Bach 42, both in the open wrap and the closed wrap configurations. You'll still see Yamaha Xenos, like we mentioned. Getzen, Cody was talking about their custom line. If for Getzen, way to tell if it's a custom line instrument is if it starts with a 3, chances are it's in that line of pro model instruments. So easy way to remember that. And this is mostly talking about modern instruments, obviously. Then you have some older model horns. The King 2Bs are great options for jazz horns. 3Bs, obviously. Con 6Hs. I personally own a Con 48H. Love it. That's considered a pro line horn. Any of these instruments that you would see being used professionally would count towards pro line, but not necessarily custom made for one single person. To be honest, this is going to be your bread and butter. Most instruments you see out there are going to fall in this category, though we're starting to see a big movement towards modular instruments. Now, most people know these as just custom horns. I like to refer to them as modular, mostly because you can change out the parts of them versus a custom horn where things are soldered into place and built for that one person and only that person. So, Cody, what are some examples you see like of the modular instruments nowadays?
Well, definitely. And I kind of feel like, and this happens really quick given year to year, that these horns kind of go through different levels of popularity. But there's the Wrath out there. Mick Wrath over in England makes a great horn, and there's Wrath that you can grab a bunch of different options on, and he'll go through and make you. But you grab like an R4, and you could say I want a silver bell, or but the sizes are all kind of planned out. That's what Ben's talking about as far as like customizing that horn. There's also Edwards, which is in the same parent part of company thing as Getson. Edwards is like a branch off of Getson, and it's all in the same place in Elkhorn, Wisconsin. All like the factories are literally right next to each other. So Edwards has been out there. A lot of big names on Edwards. I remember, like I said earlier, I used to think that I needed like some kind of T305, and then I remember when T396s got really big. There was a moment where those were super popular, and I think right after that, in my mind, it kind of seemed like Raff really rose the top. Another one that's recently grabbed a lot of artists, including Koichiro Yamamoto and, of course, Joe Alessi. If you don't know, this has been big news, but is Shires, and they've been around for a while. Those are kind of the big ones in my mind, is Shires, Raff, and Edwards have always been kind of the big modular horns in my mind. Is there one that I'm missing here, Ben?
Antoine Courtois are pretty popular as well. One of the big things with this is what I've noticed is, you're talking about the T302. With jazz horns, you don't necessarily get as many options as you do as if you had a concert horn that had an F attachment. Once we start adding attachments, especially like bass trombones, these companies will let you pick what style braces you want, and they'll screw on. So there's a lot of moving parts, but you'll sit there and they'll have all sorts of braces for you to pick out. You can change tuning slides, valves, bass trombonists, all about them valves. And you can really get kind of overwhelmed by the options. You mentioned that T302. I think in the world of jazz horns, I really do think that there's really not a huge market for the modular system. And I think that's what stock horns are so popular in jazz horns, either stock or straight custom horns, because you really don't have a lot there. But once you start dealing with more bracing and things like that, these modular horns become more popular. People will sit there and swap them out. You might buy an old Edwards, and then switch out the bell or switch out some brace or some tuning slide. On Trombone Chat, people do that all the time. They're buying and selling parts of trombones. Shires obviously will work with other Shires stuff. And I think there's even some instruments that take box slides, things like that, like the compatibilities, and then really build a horn that might work, but sometimes some combinations you might find out after you spend $5,000, $6,000 don't sound that great.
Yeah, if you're in the business, we call those Frankenbones, man. Whenever you throw a bunch of stuff together. Speaking of like throwing different options and stuff, I mean, like Michael Underwood, who plays principal trombone in the Arkansas Symphony Orchestra, and I was lucky enough to study with, plays the Shires, and while I was studying with him, he had his bell got crinkled up, and I don't know if you know, a lot of Shires are two-piece bells, meaning like the end of the bell screws off, and so he got that bell like fixed, and then he got a new bell from Shires with some slight modifications. And I also know that he had for his F attachment, he had an optional E attachment, so he could tune down to E. So that's the kind of part stuff you can get into. And of course, if you've got a removable lead pipe, this might be kind of a hot button topic, but you can go really deep with that. You can go from just the standard lead pipes, and then there's people who make you $400 lead pipes. I know Brass Arc was a big one. I'm not personally like super knowledgeable on removable lead. I do have one of my 3508, but as far as get deep into that, I'm definitely gonna say I'm not an expert. So look into that on your own. And I was also gonna say, talking about all these stock horns or whatever, before, like, stock horns have been around a lot longer than modular and completely custom. So I mean, if you're wondering, like, that's why, and this is funny, like maybe people even played Frankenbones back in the day. A lot of people just think that J.J. Johnson played a 3B, which is like half accurate. He played a 3B bell with a 2B slide. So even back then, and I'm sure King personally set that up for him. Kai Winding had the same setup. Those horns have a name, and they've proven themselves. But also, if you're looking for something super specific to you, you just gotta brace that out. I think if you're at this point in the buying process, you don't need me to tell you what it is that you're looking for necessarily. But and I also this is maybe a can of worms for another time, but I've recently just been racking my brain with the existence of used Edwards and Rafts and all these custom horns for different guys that they're now selling. And it's like this kind of almost one of a kind horn that was made for who knows who, and now you're buying it secondhand. And and I know that there's some real differing opinions on this. I saw that Ian Bousfield was saying that oftentimes, like, trombonists don't know what they need. Like the maker knows like what they need, and so it's like a big mental game, and that's probably true to some level. That's just all up for you to make up on your own, man.
Sorry, I was just going to say, based on that used market, I think that might be part of the appeal of the modular trombone is that if you buy somebody else's used custom-made trombone from like Edwards or a company that has a lot of parts available, that it might be actually cheaper to piece that out and just buy those parts separate. I think that is going to be one plus side we see is there's going to be a massive market of different parts, which is neat to see because we don't really have that market right now in the trombone world.
Yeah, relatively speaking, all this is really new. And then going into completely custom horns. And the only reason we kind of put this off as its own category is it seems like a kind of new thing. I'm sure that's happened in the past with like specific artists for sure. But like the BAC horn that I have is completely custom done by Mike. I talked about what I was looking for sound-wise. He recommended what I thought would go. We talked about some different options, and then he built the horn for me, and there's not another trombone exactly like this one in the world anywhere, which is super cool. I'm not going to lie. I did pay for it. It was expensive, but it is still kind of, I think, for the most part, in the same range as that modular stuff. And I was kind of thinking about, Ben was talking about the jazz market and there being these completely custom horns. I think that in my mind, if you go to one of these smaller companies, you're almost getting a completely custom horn. If you get a trombone from Butler who's trying to make carbon fiber horns, there's just not a ton of those out there. I mean, so the uniqueness of that is almost super custom. And I know there's a couple other smaller companies like that who will make horns for you. But yeah, as far as completely custom, my biggest piece of advice having done that is just to play around on a lot of stuff before you decide to do that. Because if you're picking everything out, you need to know the differences and stuff, and then what you want in this and what you want in that, as far as slide weight, bell material, your valve, if you're playing a bass trombone, even deeper, independent, dependent, it just keeps going. And I mean, I really like the one I have. I'm super glad that it's unique. It's a great horn.
Yeah, man. I think something to note there is the reason that that's in your BAC is in a separate category, and we're including that here is the fact that when you order one of these trombones like this, since there's none like it, there's not going to be parts out there. Mike goes as far as soldering lead pipes into place. So there is a lot there. Things aren't going to move around once that instrument's made. You're not going to be able to change things out. And that's part of the reason why this is a separate category. It's a permanent decision almost, or for a lot of instruments, it's definitely a permanent decision. And it might be harder to resell. So it needs to be an instrument that you plan on keeping. If it's made for you, the next guy might not like it, especially let's say the thumb brace on the trigger was cut out for your thumb or something like that. I say that because I went with Cody whenever he got his trombone, and that was one of the last touches they made on the instrument was when he was there. That might not work for the next guy if you decide to sell that BAC and
Yeah, that was a super fun day, man.
Yeah, Mike's got a great shop over there, man. There's some neat instruments there. You can tell he's monkeyed around with a lot of different things and tried some different stuff. And he's definitely put in a lot of time researching this and I don't know, man. It was a really cool shop, but yeah, if you're gonna buy one of these custom horns and put a lot of money into it, make sure that you know the sound you're going for. But you could tell whoever's making it for you, hey, I really like these horns, and they might know something and be able to help you out there. A lot of times, we're just playing what we. If you just explain, hey, I really like how this Bach 42 feels, but I like how this other instrument sounds, or something like that, they might be able to help you out some.
Yeah, I'll also say in respect to the lead pipe thing, Mike will make you a removable lead pipe if you want one, but I know he personally is believes pretty strongly in a solid lead pipe. And one of the things I did even when I went and picked up the horn was I played on 3 different lead pipes, and when we found the one I wanted, we found a sweet spot, which I didn't even know was a thing before that, but we just twisted it until it felt the best. He marked it and soldered it in like that. And yeah, like Ben said, the the thumb rest, it was some wood that he got from Ireland from a bagpipe maker, which is super cool. I mean, that's just the coolest thing about the custom horn is that he took me through the whole shop, told me how he made the whole thing, and I have cool stories about every piece of it. So that's the best part of getting a custom horn in my mind. But the trigger he did kind of carve down till it fit my thumb the best. So yeah, going on from that, we kind of talked about this for a second ago, but about buying used horns on the internet, and for many people, the the eternal search for that magical horn that's out there. Have you have you done any of that, Ben?
Yes, I have. As I told you before, I did get a con director that way. A con director is nothing special. Like I said, there's a ton of them, but you can get good deals on instruments. My wife plays flute, and found a piccolo at a pawn shop a couple years ago that they wanted $60 for. I talked them down to $40, and it was a Gemeinhardt piccolo. Ended up being valued at about $600 used. So came out ahead there. In the trombone world, it's a little bit easier to tell what you're looking for. When you're looking at a trombone, make sure you're looking at the inner slide stocking, or make sure you look down at the stocking of the slide so you can see. A lot of older instruments will have some wear down there. If that wear is not too bad, it might work. A lot of times people might get a slide that's out of alignment. They might pick one up and think that slide is trashed. Really, the biggest thing you're looking for is condition of that inner slide, things like that. Trombones are a simple instrument, though, and so you're looking for King 2Bs. You need to familiarize yourself with what that looks like. A King 3B, Con 6Hs, things like that are going to ending up in pawn shops. Those will be easier finds. Once you start adding valves to the equation, there's more that can go wrong. So jazz horns will always be the easiest pawn shop or yard sale find. A lot of times people won't know what they have, and it's really nice whenever you can come across something special. Haven't done that with a trombone yet, but I have found other instruments. Like I said, the piccolo was my biggest one so far. I did not know what I was looking for in a piccolo. I just took a $40 gamble, to be honest.
Yeah, speaking of going to pawn stores and stuff, my dad recently has been going to a lot of pawn stores, not for trombones, but just in general. And it's like he's now on the search for the diamond in the rough. So every time he sees a trombone, I get a call and a bunch of pictures. And I mean, I hate to report, but they've all been con directors so far. But maybe someday he'll find a 6H and someone will not know what they have. And just going off that point, I'll just caution people that when you're looking for trombones on pawn stores, or even more so, like the deep internet, be a little cautious. Either make sure you really know what you're looking at, or you're consulting someone, or you can play test it first. The only time that I've almost bought a deep internet horn was one time when me and Ben were in undergrad together. There was an Olds Golden Bear, which, if you're not familiar, is a super rare trombone. It had the Golden Bear counterweight for $40 at a Goodwill in Oregon. and I almost had a road trip from Arkansas to Oregon, and decided last minute not to. I started adding on the gas price onto the horn. It got a lot more expensive, but but that kind of thing. Just like be cautious. I mean, there's a lot of horns that are sketchy out there, to say the least. And if you're buying something off the internet, look into the seller, look into whatever you can look into. You got any more thoughts on that, Ben?
Yeah, man. Funny story. I was just our music store over here in the small town of Hardy, Arkansas, had a King Silvertone case. Inside was a binge trombone. So make sure you're looking at the instrument inside. Don't get an instrument based on the case. Obviously, if that instrument was in the case, it was a King Silvertone, it could have been worth a lot of money. If you play a binge, I'm sorry. The ones I've played on, I'm not a large fan. I guess they do have some decent horns out there, but I haven't found it. But anyways,
yeah, if you're not familiar with binge, they were the beginner line of trombone made by Selmer. And then professional Selmers, I'm not going to go into this, but there's a deep history with. At one point, they were very competitive in the trombone making market and brass making in general. Like Louis Armstrong played on a Selmer trumpet for a bit. But after a while, there was a big divide where Kahn and King took the brass instruments and Selmer took the saxophones. As you probably know, they've made a lot of great saxophones. But yeah, I think that's kind of a wrap on that. Right before that, you got any final thoughts, any overarching thoughts on buying a horn, Ben?
Yeah, man. If you can, try out an instrument before you buy it. That's a huge thing. Make sure. A lot of times you'll read on the internet, oh, this is going to make you sound warmer. This is going to blow easier. Things like that. While a lot of those things can be true, a lot of it is we get these preconceived ideas in our head of how it should feel and how it should sound that we convince ourselves of it. And so just make sure you just try to play each instrument you're looking at with an open mind, and you might end up getting surprised, actually.
Yeah, man. I have a kind of similar thought, which is just like, don't be afraid to consult somebody. Consult somebody who knows what they're talking about. Consult a trombonist. Consult a professional trombonist. And if you don't know one personally, there's a bunch of them on the internet. As I talked about earlier, hit up the trombone chat or message somebody. I mean, there's a lot of people with a ton of knowledge about trombones who are more than willing to give their opinion on them. I assure you. So definitely just ask somebody and they'll steer you in the right direction. And, also, this kind of a last little side note, don't always buy a horn because someone plays on it. Hey, that's that person. You can buy a 6H, but it's not going to make you sound like Frank Roslino, okay? Frank Roslino sounds like Frank Roslino on a 2B. I have audio proof if somebody wants that. I have a recording of him playing a 2B. But, these guys sound like themselves. And then these bigger guys now in the modern day are often sponsored. And I'm not saying their horns aren't great. They often are. They often have their own model horn built for them with their name on it. They're often great. But, when you're that good and you're getting the horn built for you, they're going to build it to your specs, and you're going to sound amazing because you're that person. Joe Alessi sounds amazing on Shires. He sounded amazing on Edwards. I guarantee you, if I gave him my BAC, he'd sound incredible. So ask a professional trombonist and see where they want to steer you. And, just don't be afraid to ask the internet. The last thing before we log off here is our album recommendation for the week. I actually got this one from Ben because I wanted to throw a little bass trombone love out there this week. And the album this week is from Ben Van Dyke, who is, if you don't know, one of the world's premier trombonists and world's premier bass trombonist. The album is Nana by Ben Van Dyke. It's got a lot of crazy stuff on it. There's he does some Buckner motets with the New York field trombone section. He does a tune, Mr. Roberts, devoted to George Roberts, who's Mr. Bass Trombone. If you're not familiar with him, he's the guy. And he even plays a little flamenco on guitar on there. It's a little special treat. And he's not, I don't know if this is surprising, but he's incredible. He's just an incredible musician. So I just want to thank everybody for listening, and happy shedding.